February 18th, 1933, 38th Avenue, Denver, Colorado, in the back room. Giuseppe Joe Roma sits at a table, waiting. He's in his early 50s, dressed in a suit despite the late hour. The back door is unlocked. He's expecting visitors. Outside, the temperature hovers near freezing. Denver sleeps. The city that began as a gold rush camp, that survived boom and bust cycles, that's trying to decide whether it's still a frontier town or a modern American city. That city has no idea what's about to happen. The back door opens. Footsteps. Voices. Men arrive, unknown to history, but clearly familiar enough to be admitted. Then the gunfire. Multiple shots at close range. Roma slumps in his chair, killed quickly. The shooters leave through the back door, vanishing into the Denver night. No witnesses, no evidence beyond the body. This murder, quiet, efficient, brutal, marks a turning point in Denver's criminal underworld. Roma wasn't a national figure. He never made headlines like Capone or Luciano. But in Denver, he was the man who kept peace, who mediated disputes, who maintained influence through respect rather than fear. His death creates a power vacuum that will eventually be filled by younger, more ambitious criminals. The case will never be solved. To understand why Joe Roma died that night, why his murder mattered, and why it changed Denver, we need to go back to when the city was still choosing what kind of criminal underworld it would tolerate. Early 1900s. Denver is growing rapidly, transforming from mining town to regional city. The population explodes, industries diversify, and among the newcomers flooding into Denver are Italian immigrants, many from Sicily, particularly from the province of Palermo. They settle primarily in South Denver and the neighborhood around 38th Avenue, working as laborers, opening small businesses, building community institutions. They bring with them the culture of Southern Italy, tight family bonds, distrust of government authority, and traditions of resolving disputes privately. They also bring something darker that's plagued Italian communities across America: the Black Hand. Not an organization, but a method. Extortion through anonymous threatening letters marked with a black handprint. Pay or face arson, violence, kidnapping. Italian business owners in Denver received these letters through the 1900s and 1910s. Most pay quietly. The Denver police, largely unfamiliar with Italian culture and language, struggle to investigate. The Black Hand operates in shadows, feeding on fear and isolation. But Denver's Italian criminal landscape is fragmented. No single boss, no organized hierarchy, just individual operators, small gangs, opportunists exploiting their own community. Crime exists, but it's chaotic, uncoordinated, limited in scope and ambition. Then, January 16th, 1920 arrives, and the entire criminal landscape transforms overnight. The Volstead Act takes effect. Alcohol, manufacture, sale, transportation, becomes illegal nationwide. For criminals across America, prohibition represents opportunity on a scale previously unimaginable. In Denver, the impact is immediate. The city's geographic location becomes useful. Denver sits near regional distribution routes and serves as a secondary hub for bootlegging in the Mountain West. Routes pass through from various sources, and Denver's growing population creates local demand. Bootleggers need distribution networks. Speakeasies called Blind Pigs in Denver open across the city, operating with varying degrees of police tolerance. The money flowing through illegal alcohol dwarfs anything Black Hand extortion ever generated. Italian criminals in Denver, along with Irish, Jewish, and other ethnic operators, move into bootlegging. But the business requires organization. Suppliers need to be reliable. Distribution routes need to be protected. Territorial disputes need to be settled. Payoffs to police and politicians need to be coordinated. Denver's criminal underworld begins consolidating, and into this consolidation steps Joe Roma. Giuseppe Roma was born around 1881 or 1882 in Italy, likely Sicily, though exact records are unclear. He arrives in the United States around 1909, part of the massive wave of Italian immigration. He settles in Denver, starting as a fruit peddler, pushing a cart through neighborhoods, selling produce, learning English, building relationships. He's industrious, personable, respected in the Italian community. As Prohibition creates opportunity, he moves into bootlegging, not as a street-level operator, but as an organizer, a coordinator. He has connections to suppliers. He has relationships with speakeasy owners who need steady product. He has the trust of the Italian community, which provides both customers and cover. Legitimate business on the surface, criminal operations in the back room where bootlegging deals are made, where disputes are settled, where the structure of Denver's emerging Italian organized crime takes shape. Community accounts portray Roma as a mediator, though official documentation is scarce. He's widely reputed within the Italian community to settle disputes. When two bootleggers argue over territory, when a speakeasy owner has trouble with suppliers, when the Italian community faces internal conflicts that might attract police attention. He cultivates an image of respectability. He's generous to the community, helping struggling families, supporting church functions, maintaining the appearance of a successful, legitimate businessman. But everyone understands his real power. By the mid-1920s, Joe Roma is Denver's most influential Italian criminal, not through fear, but through respect and utility. He builds a crew, though crew overstates its formality. It's more a network of associates who handle various operations: bootlegging, some gambling, protection services for Italian businesses. The organization is small compared to Chicago or New York operations, but effective for Denver's scale. Roma maintains careful relationships with law enforcement, not through crude bribery necessarily, though money likely changes hands, but through being useful. He keeps violence down in the Italian community. He provides information when it serves his interests. He's the kind of criminal that corrupt police can tolerate, because he doesn't create problems that force reform. No evidence links Roma to Kansas City figures during his lifetime. Connections between Denver and Kansas City organized crime emerge long after Roma's death. Denver, during the 1920s, operates with considerable independence, geographically distant from major Mafia centers. Roma navigates various relationships successfully through the decade, building wealth and influence while keeping Denver's underworld relatively stable. But stability breeds resentment, particularly among younger criminals who see opportunities Roma isn't pursuing. The Smaldone brothers, Clyde and Eugene Checkers Smaldone, along with their brother Clarence Chauncey, are rising figures in Denver's underworld by the late 1920s. They're younger than Roma, more aggressive and more ambitious about expanding operations beyond bootlegging into gambling, loan sharking, and labor racketeering. They operate in the same criminal circles as Roma and likely interact with him, though the degree of closeness between them is disputed. The Smaldones themselves later denied having a close relationship with Roma. Whether they were competitors, casual associates, or something else isn't clearly documented. What's apparent is that by the early 1930s, younger criminals in Denver, the Smaldones prominent among them, are expanding their operations and ambitions in ways that may have created tension with Roma's more conservative approach. 1930 to 1931. The Castellamarese War erupts in New York, a conflict between two factions of the Italian Mafia led by Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. The war is nominally about control of New York's rackets, but it affects mafia figures across the country. Major Midwest cities, Kansas City, St. Louis, Cleveland, have stakes in the conflict. Denver, with its much smaller Italian underworld, is not directly involved. The war's outcome, Maranzano's victory, followed by his assassination, leading to creation of the Commission, establishes a more formalized national mafia structure. The 5 New York families are established, territories are defined, the organization becomes more corporate, more hierarchical. Denver, small and distant from Eastern power centers, isn't immediately affected by these structural changes. But the trends are significant. The era of independent local bosses is gradually ending, replaced by organizations aligned with broader networks. And Prohibition is ending. By 1933, it's obvious that repeal is coming. The 21st Amendment will be ratified in December, eliminating the constitutional basis for the Volstead Act. For bootleggers, this means their primary revenue source is about to evaporate legally. Forward-thinking criminals are already transitioning, expanding gambling operations, moving into loan sharking, exploring new rackets that will survive repeal. The Smaldone brothers are among those preparing for the post-Prohibition era. They're building gambling operations, establishing loan sharking networks. Roma's position during this transition period isn't well documented. Some historians speculate the shifting criminal economy may have played a role in creating tensions, but no direct evidence connects Prohibition repeal to the murder. By late 1932 and early 1933, the criminal landscape is shifting. How Roma fits into these changes, what specific conflicts existed, what tensions emerge, most of this remains unclear from historical records. Some accounts suggest Roma became more cautious in the weeks before his death, though these reports are difficult to verify. Whether he sensed specific danger or was simply responding to the general instability of the period isn't known. February 18, 1933. The exact sequence of events leading to that night isn't documented. Who initiated it, what the stated purpose was, who exactly was expected, aren't established by surviving records. What's certain is that men arrived at the store. Roma was found seated. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting he admitted people he knew. The shooting occurred at close range. He was hit 7 times according to the coroner's report. The attack was quick and fatal. The shooters exited, leaving Roma dead. No surviving police reports indicate the recovery of any murder weapon. His body was discovered the following morning. The Denver Police Department responded immediately. The crime scene was processed. The coroner examined the body, documenting the gunshot wounds. Witnesses were sought, but police records show no witnesses came forward. Whether due to fear, loyalty, or cultural norms remains uncertain. The investigation focused quickly on the Smaldone brothers. Law enforcement suspected they might have had motives tied to the shifting criminal landscape, but no documented motive has ever been proven. They were in Denver, but their alibis, while not strongly convincing, couldn't be definitively disproven. Physical evidence linking them to the murder didn't exist. No murder weapons were recovered. No witnesses came forward. No forensic evidence tied them to the scene. The Denver police, facing silence from the community and lack of hard evidence, couldn't build a prosecutable case. The Smaldones were questioned and released. No charges were filed. The investigation continued nominally, but stalled quickly. Within months, it was effectively closed, though never officially solved. The theories about who killed Joe Roma have circulated for decades, each with supporting evidence and counter-arguments. The most commonly cited theory is that the Smaldone brothers orchestrated the murder, eliminating Roma to advance their own criminal interests. The circumstantial evidence is notable. Roma's death created a vacuum that remained partially unfilled for years. The The Smaldones eventually emerged as Denver's leading criminal family, but only gradually. They expanded influence through the late 1930s, but their true rise to dominance came in the 1940s and 1950s. During this period, they controlled gambling and loan sharking operations, rackets that became more important after Prohibition ended in December 1933. Their alibis during the investigation were questioned, but never definitively broken. Multiple law enforcement officials believed they were involved but couldn't prove it. The counterarguments are significant. Physical evidence was entirely lacking. The relationship between Roma and the Smaldones isn't well documented, and suspicion based on timing doesn't constitute proof. But in the context of criminal power transitions, circumstantial patterns often suggest truths that courtroom evidence can't establish. Some historians have speculated about Kansas City involvement in the murder. Kansas City had organized crime operations, and Denver could theoretically have been of interest. However, no direct evidence links Kansas City to Roma's murder. The theory exists primarily as speculation based on geographic proximity and later relationships, not on documented facts from 1933. Without concrete evidence, Kansas City's involvement remains conjecture. Another theory involves internal Italian community disputes, personal vendettas, business conflicts, or cultural tensions carried from Sicily to America. Such dynamics existed in Italian communities nationwide, where immigrants from different Sicilian towns sometimes maintained old rivalries. Roma, as a reputed mediator and arbiter, would have made decisions that created winners and losers, potentially generating resentment. However, no specific feud or vendetta has been identified as the motive for his murder. The theory is plausible in general terms but lacks particular evidence. A related theory suggests revenge for specific mediation decisions Roma made during his years as Denver's criminal arbiter. Over more than a decade, Roma reportedly settled numerous disputes. Some decisions inevitably created aggrieved parties who lost money, territory, or status. A sufficiently serious grievance could have motivated murder. But like the vendetta theory, this lacks specificity. No particular mediation has been identified as the trigger. No alternative suspect has been credibly named. A final theory suggests action by younger criminals, not necessarily the Smaldones, but other ambitious operators who saw Roma as an obstacle to change. The approaching end of Prohibition, the changing criminal landscape, the generational tensions between older, more conservative operators and younger, more aggressive criminals, all created conditions for conflict. This theory fits the era's dynamics but lacks evidence pointing to any specific perpetrator. What happened after Roma's murder reveals important patterns. Over the following years, the Smaldone brothers became increasingly powerful in Denver's underworld. Roma died in February 1933, and Prohibition ended in December 1933, meaning there were no bootlegging networks to inherit after repeal. Instead, the Smaldones built their power through gambling operations, loan sharking, and eventually other rackets. Through the late 1930s, they expanded influence, but their true dominance emerged in the 1940s and 1950s, when they became Denver's primary organized crime family. Clyde Smaldone eventually became recognized as a significant organized crime figure in the Rocky Mountain region. The Smaldone family controlled various illegal operations for decades. Whether their rise resulted from killing Roma or simply from filling a vacuum his death created remains uncertain. The timing is suggestive but not definitive. The murder was never solved officially. No one was ever arrested for killing Joe Roma. The Denver police case file remained open but inactive. No witnesses ever came forward, even decades later when the risks had diminished. This silence reveals the community's insularity, its suspicion of authorities, and its adherence to codes that handled justice internally rather than through official legal channels. The failure to solve the case also suggests possible police limitations or corruption. Denver's police in the 1930s weren't immune to the corruption that existed in many cities during and after Prohibition. Officers who'd accepted payoffs had incentive to avoid investigating too vigorously. The combination of community silence and possible law enforcement limitations created conditions where the murder remained unsolved. Public perception of Joe Roma after his death became divided. To some in Denver's Italian community, he was remembered as a respected figure who helped people and maintained stability. To others, particularly outside the Italian community, he was simply a bootlegger who died violently. To law enforcement, he was both, a criminal they'd tolerated and a murder victim whose killing they couldn't solve. His legacy in Denver is complex. Neither purely villain nor hero, but something more ambiguous that doesn't fit simple narratives. Roma's death affected Denver's criminal structure, though the changes occurred gradually rather than immediately. It created a vacuum that remained partially unfilled for years. The Smaldones eventually emerged as Denver's leading criminal family through the late 1930s and into the 1940s and 1950s, establishing themselves through gambling, loan sharking, and other rackets. The shift represented a generational change from Roma's mediation-based approach to the Smaldones' more aggressive expansion. Whether this shift would have occurred regardless of Roma's death, or whether the murders specifically enabled it, remains unclear. Where Joe Roma died did not survive long term. Today, nothing remains to mark the site of Roma's death. Most Denver residents don't know Joe Roma's name. He's not part of the city's popular history. But to students of organized crime, Roma represents a transitional figure, operating during the shift from Prohibition-era chaos to more structured criminal organizations, maintaining power through mediation and respect, rather than primarily through violence, and dying at a moment when the criminal world was reorganizing. The case remains officially unsolved nearly a century later. The men who killed him, quite possibly the Smaldone brothers, though never proven, were never charged, never confessed, took their secrets to their graves. Clyde Smaldone lived until 2006, dying at age 93. Eugene Checkers Smaldone died in 2011 at age 98. Neither was ever prosecuted for the 1933 murder. No surviving police reports indicate the recovery of any murder weapon. The witnesses who may have existed never came forward. The evidence disappeared into silence. This is the nature of organized crime murders in the era before sophisticated forensics, before witness protection programs, before RICO statutes. Murders happened, power shifted, and the codes of silence ensured that legal justice rarely occurred. February 18th, 1933. Multiple gunshots. One man dead, and Denver's underworld entering a period of transition. Joe Roma died in his early 50s, killed by people he apparently knew well enough to admit to his store. Whether he believed in old codes of honor and respect, whether he understood the danger he faced, whether he could have prevented his murder, none of this is documented. What's known is that his death created space for others to eventually rise. The Smaldones filled that space over subsequent years, building an organization that dominated Denver's criminal landscape through the mid-20th century. Whether they killed Roma to create that opportunity or simply capitalized on a vacuum his death created, the result was the same: a shift from one era of Denver organized crime to another. Roma's murder wasn't necessarily the first act of a new order. It may simply have been the last act of an old one. the final moment when mediation and respect could maintain criminal power, before more aggressive, more violent methods became necessary for survival. Denver's underworld learned what other cities had learned. Criminal organizations were evolving, becoming more structured and more ruthless. Those who adapted survived. Those who didn't became history. Joe Roma became history, and no one was ever punished for making him so, because in the world he inhabited, justice meant something different than courtrooms and convictions. It meant power, and power that night belonged to someone else.